Hi, my name is Lexi. I am a therapist here at Heartland Wellness Center. I mainly work in the Chesterton location on both the recovery side and the behavioral health side. So today we are going to talk about trauma. Intimidating, I know, right? Doesn't have to be. So first, let's start out with what is trauma. So oftentimes people think of trauma as this big event. They think of it like a car accident, near-death experience, abuse, assault, something big, right? But in reality, if we think about what trauma is, it can actually be a situation that we feel an emotion in so strongly it overwhelms us. So trauma can pretty much be a big event or a small event. It just means that we felt that emotion so strongly it consumed us. The trauma isn't really so much about the situation, it's more about the emotion that we felt. And in that time, our trauma could pass, but our body continues to relive it as though we're still in that situation. So when that happens, our body responds to everyday situations as though we're back in that trauma. And what happens when this occurs is that it causes all these issues with our daily functioning. And we can't cope correctly and we can't live correctly or live to our fullest self because we're constantly in this state of survival. The issue with trauma comes when we are living our daily life and we could experience a threat to our survival, whether that could be real or perceived. And the issue comes when I have all these trauma responses that are showing up in my life. So when we experience a big event that causes us to release that trauma response, we get that strong emotion back that we felt when we were overwhelmed by our traumatic experience. So this means I might feel overly anxious. I might feel a lot of anger. I might have an anger outburst. My temperature is gonna rise. My heart's gonna start beating really fast. It might be difficult for me to catch my breath. And this looks normal even years after we experience that traumatic event due to the fact that we continue to relive it because my brain tells me that I need to stay safe. So in trauma, after experiencing a traumatic event, my nervous system changes and increases more hormones in my body. So I have more stress hormones coming from my body. So what happens in that is that I am more easily startled. Now I'm working from a standpoint of just trying to survive from day to day. We also know that trauma changes the part of our brain that affects rational and irrational thinking. So what occurs in this is that I can no longer function as though I am thinking rational thoughts in that moment when I feel that trauma response showing up, right? So this obviously affects our daily living. So in trauma, a lot of people try to avoid their trauma. They try to deny it, suppress it, push it out, and we enter into survival mode. And in survival mode, our brain tells us that it's safer to avoid than cope. So a lot of times when we work on the recovery side, we see that these clients come in and they have all of this trauma that occurs. In trauma, we have this thing called our trauma addiction cycle. And we see a trauma happen, and then we obviously have pain from that trauma, whatever strong emotion I feel from that trauma. Then we move into our avoidance skills. And so in avoidance, I want to do things like isolate. I want to not talk to people about my trauma. I might use a substance to cope. And then what I do with my avoidance is this only leads to further complications. And then this only leads to more trauma, and it continues happening and happening and happening. There's a lot of different ways that you can identify that you might be affected by trauma. So let's talk about some signs and symptoms. So someone might be affected by hypervigilance. You might find yourself being, having a big startle reflex, being hypervigilant and always hyper aware of what's going on around you. You might have insomnia. You could be disassociating of what's going on around you. A big one is being unable to regulate your own emotions, being unable to self-soothe yourself, to calm yourself down and help yourself regulate back to your space and your body. And then another huge one is difficulties focusing. And a big part about trauma is it's not just in our in our minds, it's also in our body too. So we store a lot of trauma inside of our body, and it plays a big role in somatic symptoms. So oftentimes people who are affected by trauma struggle with things like chronic pain, GI issues, fatigue, headaches, migraines. And so we see that stuff affect people, and oftentimes they don't think that it's related to their trauma. They think, oh, I'm stressed. And stress oftentimes gets confused with trauma. With stress, you can have a difficult situation, and once you get over it, it's gone. With trauma, you continue to relive that situation as though it's happening right now over and over and over again. So we've talked about what trauma is, we've talked about how trauma affects you, and you're probably asking yourself right now, well, how do I cope with it? So let's talk about coping with trauma. So the biggest part about coping with trauma is connecting with others. So this means talking and connecting with a licensed mental health professional. We know that talking helps, and connecting with others is huge. As humans, we are meant to connect to other people. We thrive on connection. And in connection, this means talking to others about our experiences, about our traumas, about the difficult parts of ourselves. Remembering that we have to get out of that survival brain, and in our survival brain, there's lots of shame. There's lots of difficulties around talking about trauma. One of my favorite things to teach clients is that shame dies when vulnerability is present. So being vulnerable and being open about your trauma experience, about your difficulties, teaches yourself that you are more powerful than the experience that you went through. You are more powerful than a situation you felt powerless to. It's also really big to connect with other people who went through similar experiences. So you might be able to learn from them and grow together during your healing journey. So in trauma therapy, we have what we call a trauma toolbox. So we can have our tools that we use, and we can pull from these whenever we need to. So whenever we're feeling that trauma response going on. So some of these are grounding. Grounding means pulling yourself back to this space. Pulling myself back to where I am in the here and now. So this might be working on my breathing, feeling myself in my chair in this moment, pulling myself back to my physical body. Another tool is working on breath work. So working on collecting your breathing, making sure that you're focused on your breathing, and taking slow and deep breaths. A big tool in trauma work is affirmations. So saying different things to yourself that you feel you need to hear. So this can look like, I am more powerful than what happened to me. I am strong. I am worthy of love and respect. Saying these things to yourself out loud, maybe even in a mirror, saying them so that you can actually hear them. And what one person might use might not work for another person. The big thing is about finding what works for you. So there's things like yoga, somatic shaking, EFT tapping, listening to music. And another huge one is self-compassion. So understanding that your journey is your journey and being compassionate about where you are on your journey. The big thing about this journey is that it might be scary, but we have to feel the fear and do it anyways. We have to get through that. We have to stop our avoidance, and we have to be compassionate with ourselves and know that we can get through this. We are powerful, and we are stronger than we think and braver than we know. So reach out to a friend. Reach out to us here at Heartland, reach out to another organization, reach out to ask for help, and understand that it's okay to ask for help.